Welcome to Behind the Sofa. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Sofa. My name's Ollie.
And I'm Kirsty.
How you doing, Kirsty?
I'm good. I think we've had a pretty good weekend so far, don't you?
Yeah. So, Kirsty, for my birthday, because she's lovely,
No.
got us tickets to the Stanley Kubrick exhibit up in what is it? The Design Museum.
Design Museum in London. Yep.
Yeah. And so we got to go and see Jack Torrance's typewriter, the axe that he uses to smash through the door. We got to see the twins' dresses, which was my favourite, I've got to say.
Yeah. And Grady twins' dresses was pretty amazing, and Danny Torrance's Apollo 11 jumper, which is kind of pretty good timing because it's like 50th anniversary of. Is it 50th
Of Stanley
anniversary?
Kubrick faking the moon landing, you mean?
That's a whole nother podcast.
I wish they sold that jumper in an adult size.
Yeah.
In a big old bear size. I'd be all over it.
I reckon you could probably find someone who would make that for you.
Could rock it.
Yeah.
Whether I could find someone to make it for me.
You could totally.
But whether I should wear it or not.
You could totally rock it.
Give it. Oh my god, Kirsty just shot me a look. Like, I'm about to say a funny. Play along with what I'm about to say.
It was such a good funny.
It was a good funny.
Yeah, so the exhibit's on until September. This is September 2019 for anyone listening later than that. But I would suggest booking before the 12th of August, even if you go afterwards, but book your tickets because the price is going up for the last few weeks and it is definitely worth looking at if you're a fan of Kubrick, if you're a fan of The Shining.
They had so much other cool stuff there. They had the car from the Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
They had the Private Joker's helmet from Full Metal Jacket.
Born to Kill one.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. It was so cool.
Yeah.
But what are we talking about today?
We are talking about Larry Cohen's 1976 weird movie, God Told Me To, which is number 97 on our list of the top 100 horror movies in history.
Yeah? You want to give us a quick rundown, the plot?
Okay, so it's basically a police procedural, but don't let that put you off, or maybe it will, which is based around a detective in New York, or a lieutenant in New York, who is investigating a bunch of strange murders in which the suspects have all said that God told them to do it. And that's basically the shortest premise ever. Now
that starts off at one point.
Yeah.
By the end of the film, you will basically have forgotten about that.
Yeah, I mean...
Spoilers as always. We're always going to spoil. So.
Absolutely. You can actually go and watch it if you haven't seen it already. If you go to tinyurl.com/watch God Told Me To. And we've actually got it up on our website for you to watch because some friendly person put it up on YouTube, so we decided to share the YouTube video. So
cheers,
thanks
YouTube.
Thanks, YouTube. The first thing that I wanted to say is we watched this last night, and we usually try and watch it the night before we record so that it's fresh in our minds. And Ollie and I don't know if you guys do the same thing, but if we go to the cinema and go and watch something, we're very considerate cinema goers. We literally walk out of the theatre in complete silence until we get to our car, and when we get in the car and shut the door, that is when we start talking about the film. So we're not going to do we give plenty of spoilers here, but coming out of the cinema we're not going to spoil it for anyone who might be going in, because we've had people do that to us before.
Yeah.
So basically we've ended up doing the same thing with this. I mean, we watched it fairly late last night anyway, and it was a lot to process, so I think we just sort of went, do you know what, we're not going to talk about it at all until we get onto the podcast. So I have no clue what Ollie thought of this film, and he has no clue what I thought of this film, so here we go.
It was a real doozy. I don't even know where the fuck to start with this movie. It traverses a wide range of batshit crazy topics. So there's some like religious culty zealotry going on. There's alien abduction. There's weird
Blaxploitation.
Yeah, there's some blaxploitation
corrupt
in there.
Police.
There's some weird, like, psychonetic mind battles going on as well. It's got everything.
But yet it's still... it's not the best. I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people see this as a cult classic. It was one that like really shocked a lot of people when it came out in the 70s. I mean, it was the same year as Martin that we reviewed last time. So go and check that out if you haven't already. But I don't know whether that just means that, you know, the poster, like, I reached a point in this film where I thought that we were watching a cut version of it, because I was like, the poster is done in a style that's like almost like a 50s or 60s horror, you know, shocking, lots of exclamation points, and has like a warning on it that says, you know, this film contains extreme violence and horror. And I was like, okay, so where is it? Where's...
The most shocking thing about this movie for me was that the main detective, played by, what's the guy's name?
Tony LoBianco.
So Tony LoBianco, it says in the thing he's 34. I'm 34. I am a man-child who wears Simpsons t-shirts and shorts basically everywhere I go. That man was easily in his 50s.
Yeah, and then the guy, spoilers, the guy at the beginning who starts picking people off of the top, he's sitting at the top of a water tower with a sniper rifle picking people off in the street. He said he is 22, and I literally wrote down, this guy is not 22.
He had a mustache like Nigel Mansell. There is no fucking way that guy is 22. Let's talk about that opening scene.
Okay.
So I thought it did some things quite well. I thought it kind of, let's imagine the terrible situation we're in. There's a sniper on the rooftops of a major city. I thought it captured quite well the way that people would be running around. Some people don't know what the fuck's going on. Some people are running to victims. Some people are running away from victims. I thought that was great. What's not so great is when you hear gunshots. Someone is flying through the air, blood exploding out of their face, and then you hear the gunshot. I was like, now I'm pretty sure that guy's not so far away that the normal speed of sound would not apply. But
well, they said it was a telescopic lens that he had on it, but that made me think the amount of people that were like running to the victim and then immediately being able to point exactly the trajectory of the bullet where it came from. They were all pointing up in the air like, it came from over there. I'm like, how do you know that? How the hell are you
some of the
ballistics experts?
Tony LoBianco, the main detective, the main actor in it, he was great. I thought his portrayal was really good, believable as you can be in a crazy God told me to alien death cult. The people around him, for the most part, are awful, and especially
the police.
The police, and but those extras getting shot at the start,
they were amazing.
Some of them were like dancing the Charleston before they fell over.
It's like, if anyone's seen, there was one bit, I think you can probably find the video because other people find it as hilarious as I do. There's one bit in Commando, like Arnold Schwarzenegger Commando, where there's a whole bunch of people on, like a whole bunch of soldiers or, you know, like whatever, on a roof, and someone gets shot with a machine gun and he does this amazing dance and then falls over and dies. And it's basically like that, like people just sort of like flinging themselves through the air. It was pretty incredible, but you shouldn't be giggling at things like that.
And also the thing that really got me about that scene is like, so he goes up, he confronts the guy who's the sniper in a very kind of relaxed scene, I would say, considering a guy's killed 15 people.
I'm Peter, I'm a Virgo, but, you know, not a traditional Virgo, you know, and he's like really giving him a whole lot of details. I know it's like you're supposed to sort of humanise him so he's not just a...
But all I could think at the end of that scene, so the guy does what can only be described as a swanton bomb off the top. It's like proper, like the Hardy Boys.
Proper Jeff Hardy move. It's incredible.
Dude, I was like, yeah. I was like, tens across the board. It was Olympic-esque.
It was a beautiful swan dive. But so he takes himself off the roof, so it's a bit like, okay.
And the last thing he says to the detective before he kills himself is, God told me to. God told me to kill all these people. Mm-hmm. So that kind of gives us the premise for the film. But it wasn't just God told me to. It was God told me to, and then this massive, like,
of sound, like horror, like it was the most horrific thing that someone has ever said. I mean, you're supposed to be believing, obviously, that like this guy, they've not gone into it massively, I don't think, at that point, but like the fact that he is like super religious or like struggling with his religion and
I feel like they reveal that
Peter Nicholas.
I believe that is kind of established as it goes. So the detective has a girlfriend, and then later on we just discover that he also has a wife, and he's not really like living with the wife anymore, but he won't divorce her because of this like religious guilt he has
because he's Catholic. So it's like a weird open relationship. It doesn't really get explained. I think I wrote down at one point before it was made clear that this woman was his wife. I was just like writing down when he went to go and visit her, and she was like sitting there looking all sad and stuff, and I was just like, who is this woman? I didn't feel like it was explained enough.
I think that leads on to one of my main criticisms of the film. I can enjoy a good cheesy extra death as much as the next guy, but in terms of like the technical aspects of this film, the editing is terrible. I felt like
like I said, it felt like it had just been cut like ridiculously, and I was like, are we watching the right one? Like...
it feels like almost like the projectionist in the cinema has got the can switched around, and you're like, wait, is there a missing one? Why is this? But where you want kind of a bit of build and a bit more explanation and a little bit more kind of clarification, there is none. There is none to be had.
No.
So definitely something that I feel like could have been improved upon. We haven't mentioned really, I don't think, this is Larry Cohen. So he like a real famous filmmaker, did It's Alive and The Stuff and a bunch of like classic cult movies. This I think is his most well regarded film. I don't think I've seen any of his films other than this.
You've not seen The Stuff?
No.
Okay.
It's got a fucking great cover.
Yeah.
But I've not seen it.
I mean, maybe they're ones that we need to check out, and we'll be like, oh, okay, so this is just his thing, like how he does stuff. I don't know, but
yeah.
I mean, one of the other things that I picked up on, I don't know whether you'll see it as well. I mean, this came out so Exorcist was 1973, right? I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And this was 1976. I literally wrote down that like Tony LaBianco, like the guy who plays Peter, who is like the main character in this, and he gave me the like brooding internal struggle, dark head, very serious religious Father Karras type. Like he made me think of like Damien Karras in The Exorcist. So I don't know whether he took some like guidance from that or not, but that was like one of the first things that I thought, like when it started becoming, that he's having this real struggle with his religion and his life and what to do and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, this, I'm just trying to think what happened next. Like we've got all of that.
So the next thing that happens after that is they get a phone call at the police station from a mysterious figure who basically says there's going to be another shooting.
I just remembered
there's going to be another shooting. Okay, so they get him on Peter on the phone, and they're like, "This is your speciality," because he's the one who's been investigating all of these God told me to murders, and he says to another cop after he's got off the phone with this guy who's warned that there's going to be a shooting at the St. Patrick's Day parade. He says, I gotta get you down to the parade. Oh, but I'm not supposed to be at the parade. There's going to be a shooting. And then this other cop that he's just said there's going to be a shooting, like Naruto runs. He like sprints in the direction, like,
but he doesn't even miss a beat. It's like he was waiting for those words to come out and then just literally leapt out of his seat, grabbed his coat and ran. It was he's like the Irish cop version of Usain Bolt. There was no other reaction. It was like he was waiting for him to go, ready, go, and then just ran. And it was like, it made us laugh, and it kind of brought us out of it a little bit.
100%. I could not stop. Kirsty and I normally during these things are pretty good. We try not to talk to each other too much, which I know sounds really lame, but we try not to talk to each each other too much, but we could not stop laughing.
We just both giggled at that bit. And there were other bits where, like, we ended up just, like, shooting each other looks. Like, is this really happening? Like, it was bizarre. I mean, the, So they go down to the St. Patrick's Day parade. So Larry Cohen basically had, like, coincided his filming with at the actual St. Patrick's Day parade. He had got a filming license so that he could, film stock footage or whatever, or so they thought. And then he just ended up sending his extras in there, one of whom is Andy Kaufman.
I said to Kirsty, I was like, oh my God, that guy looks so much like Andy Kaufman. And then, lo and behold, IMDb...
ended up being the first film that he was... cast in. So
he's the gunman. He's the one who shoots the people at the St. Patrick's Day parade.
So he is the next guy that, like, says God told me to, but and he's a cop in this. And apparently the bit that I thought was really funny, and it is very Andy Kaufman. If you've not seen any Andy Kaufman, you should probably go and check him out on YouTube. I mean, would you recommend the Jim Carrey Andy Kaufman movie, Man on the Moon?
It's okay. It's not my favourite.
It's meant to be pretty good. So, he was a very unpredictable man, very funny man. And apparently during the filming, there was a whole load of ruckus because obviously you've got all the crowds that are held back by the barriers and then all the people parading down the street. And at one point, Larry Cohen turns around and Andy Kaufman is basically, like, goading the crowd, and they're trying to climb over the barriers to come and beat him up. And they had to, like, pull Andy Kaufman away from the crowd because he was just winding them up so much, which I found pretty hilarious.
That sounds like classic Andy Kaufman. Yeah. So one thing I would say I know last week we reviewed Martin, and I was saying how much I love, like, that you could smell the 70s. You know what I mean? It had that real kind of griminess to it. Even though this film was set in New York, I didn't feel that same level of grime, but there were some classic 70s faces in there. You know what I mean? Like, there were the sort of faces that you would never see on film these days. Everyone's too puckered and Botox and everything. There were some weather-worn faces on there that I really dug.
So the thing that got me in the St. Patrick's Day parade that I wrote that was so funny was when Peter is running down the street to try and, like, find out what's happening and to stop the shooting or, find all the rest of the police. His footsteps are so overly foleyed, and everybody else's are as well. It literally sounds like everyone's wearing tap shoes. Like, I'm going to try and find the clip because it is hilarious. I'll try and find, like, where you should sort of tune into it. But basically, it's just literally like when he's running down the street.
Like with coconuts.
And I was like, this is not good because it's meant to be like a real dramatic moment. Like, he's trying to find, like, trying to stop people from dying, and it's just down the street, and it just it made me chuckle quite a bit.
The next note I've got written down is aliens! !
Oh my God.
Now you have my attention.
Yeah.
So basically, what happens is they start to interview the family of some of the people that have been involved in these shootings, and all of them are saying
stabbings.
Shootings and stabbings, and basically a lot of them are saying, before they killed everyone, I saw them talking to someone. And I couldn't really put my finger on what they looked like. All I know is they had, like, blonde, shoulder-length hair. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. They're kind of, like, gender neutral. They gave off this weird vibe. And then all of a sudden, I don't even remember how it happens. Like, it cuts to a scene, like, in a boardroom. Like, imagine, like, the Bilderberg group. Like, these, like, crusty white dudes sitting around a big round table. And all of a sudden, it becomes apparent that this person that has been talking to all these the killers, he's controlling their minds, and he's some kind of alien, like a Christ alien.
So they were all. It's basically the heads of different religions. So they had,
Is that what they were?
Yeah, I mean, like, they had one of them where they were like, oh, blah blah blah, talking about, like, the slaves in Egypt, and then, like, one of them makes, like, a slightly barbed comment at the guy who's obviously Jewish. So they've got, like, guys who are, like, up in their religion.
That. I thought it was just,
but it was just basically like
the head
old
of Pepsi and
it was like old white dudes in, like, a corporate board meeting, and they were meant to be, like, cult followers. And I was like, I want more from a cult meeting. Like, I want
Yeah, they've not
candles.
They've not got the show of Heaven's Gate or Jim Jones or someone like that.
Yeah, it just made me sad. So,
but that's the thing, though. This movie has so many great ideas, but none of them are just none of them are pulled off or given enough weight or given enough time to kind of expand upon. Like, so from there, the cop goes and speaks to this guy who's a reporter. And they start talking about ancient astronauts and what if God was actually like a UFO who came down and he's just like and he was able to kind of manipulate people into doing, into doing his will. And all I thought was, oh, that's a cool idea. I would love to see a horror movie that really explored that kind of idea. But it just doesn't. It just doesn't really go into it in the depth that I would have wanted it to. That's such, you know what I mean? Like I said, such a cool idea, but just left kind of untouched.
But I mean, Larry Cohen basically got some of his ideas from Chariots of the Gods, which is a book by Eric von Daniken, which basically explores, like, what if gods were the gods that we worship here or that we have worshipped, like, throughout, the history of mankind, whether they were like astronauts and visitors from another planet. And it kind of expands a little bit on that when we meet a little bit more this this figure that they haven't seen. The other thing that I noticed on there that made me chuckle a little bit as well is that all the people that were discussing it, they were just like, they interviewed the doorman, they interviewed the mother of the sniper and all of that, and they were all like, oh yeah, we remember this guy and he had like long blonde hair, like you said, and we can't really remember what he looked like exactly, but and then the doorman is like, we don't let people like that in here, and the mother is like, oh well, he never used to really, I've never known him to hang out with people like that before. And it was like this weird sort of anti-hippie sentiment that it was still around when this was made, but not as much. I mean, this was like post-Vietnam and post-Manson, and John Lennon was still around, and it was a few years after the sort of bed-in for peace and all of that. But it was this very, we don't really like that kind of person. I don't know whether that was like also a nod to like people who are like weirdly religious, whether they were just like, we don't really like weird religious people or not, or whether it was just they decided to stick that in because it was something that was going on in the city at the time. I don't know.
I wonder if it's like a Jesus comment.
Yeah,
it's like
maybe we don't really like those people.
Would have thought that Jesus was a bit of a hippie back then.
But then, the mother of the sniper was just like, his name was Phillips. Bernard Phillips, and I was just like, I'm not saying Bernard, it was literally just made me think, like, if like the second coming, or a god type person is coming down to this planet and his name is Bernard.
Saint Bernard?
Like the dog?
Yeah.
I'm gonna need to look up Saint Bernard now and find out the patron saint of like weird androgynous. Yeah.
But so basically, the reporter puts this story out there that's linking all of these God Told Me To murders together, and very quickly the whole city erupts into some kind of riot. And like I said, it's once again another indication that this film doesn't know when it needs to kind of give us a little bit more. There's no connecting tissue between the paper releases this article and then all of a sudden there's like citywide insurrection. It just seems like there's no kind of like build up, there's no like simmering tensions. It's just like from one extreme to the other. Everything just just goes so quickly when I could have used a little bit more showing.
Yeah. I mean, also, I think, like, when he's speaking to the reporter, at first, the reporter's like, I am not posting this article. Like, do you realise what would happen? Like, everyone would go crazy because I'm a science reporter. I start bringing religion into it and it will just become ridiculous. And then I think he says like a couple more sentences to him, and then all of a sudden he's like, all right, and then he's got this article, and like 5 seconds later he's fine, and it's already been posted and everything, and he's like, yeah, it's like, you are the best policeman ever, you're like super persuasive. But I mean, yeah, then there's the other parts that were sort of coming up before the the corporate cult religious men thing. Literally the only creepy scene, unnerving scene in this movie, and I don't know whether you'll agree. There's one point where this guy that they've managed to sort of to arrest and catch, he calmly explains in detail how he shot his wife and his 2 children. But just chats about it like he's talking about the weather. And that was like I said, that was the only bit that just made me think, oh, that's really creepy. But that's it. That's all of it. Like, when it comes to creepiness and, like, things that made me go, oh, like, that was basically it. Then it jumps to, so he starts investigating Bernard Phillips. Finds out that he was adopted somehow. I'm not sure how he managed to find out, but then he found the woman who adopted him, goes to her house, and it's like this super dramatic scene on the stairs where she comes running at him.
I don't know if that was I don't know if that was the version that we were watching. I could not tell what the fuck was going on. No. All I heard was just screaming and sounds, and that was it.
And then there was a woman at the bottom of the stairs dead.
Yeah.
And it was that was it.
So basically, from then on, they go and they find Bernard Phillips, and he's hanging out in, I guess, kind of like a representation of hell. He's like in some real scummy basement in a tenement in New York.
We're taking you down to the furnace room, and
then there's fire. There's a load of fire in there. One of the cool things they do, I like the way they show Bernard so basically he has this real crazy aura around him. You can't really pinpoint any of his facial features whatsoever. They put this real bright yellow light on him, and he's all kind of Vaselined around the edges, so you can't really see what he looks like. Yeah. I kind of thought that was cool. Also, I think it was the first behind the sofa experience or instance where we've had a theremin.
Yes, I did write "yay theremin" at one point.
The theremin makes a long overdue appearance,
which you wouldn't normally have, because the movie starts with like a male voice choir singing sort of religious stuff and all of that at the very beginning of the film, and then it sort of goes into real creepy organ and synth sounds and that. So now you have this religious or this glowing sort of god type figure with creepy alien B-movie music over
I guess at that point they've kind of transitioned into
this is a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, this is now a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
That showdown in the basement that they have, though, was super anticlimactic.
Yeah. I mean, it was meant to signify that Peter is different in some way, and that this god-type figure can't control him in the same way that he has been controlling everybody else when he's been, encouraging them to kill people. So we know now that there's something wrong with Peter, but it's not clearly defined.
Well, at that point, he then goes and sees another woman in an old folks' home, and this is an old folks' home that is destined to show up on an episode of Watchdog in some kind of hidden camera sting.
The worst.
Oh my god, I've never seen such negligence from healthcare professionals. It was awful.
Yeah.
And then he basically, at this point, it's pretty telegraphed, and I'd long figured out that Peter is also one of these alien creatures. So he was. They basically show this woman, and she's picked up on the side of the road, and she was in one part of the country at one point, and then 10 minutes later she's somewhere completely different
and pointlessly
and
naked.
Pointlessly
naked, just running around.
And so it's basically like, oh, Peter, you're one of these alien creatures as well, but you've been trying to hide it from yourself, and that's why your powers aren't as pronounced as Bernard. One thing I will say though is it's an appearance from the lady from Beetlejuice,
Sylvia Sidney.
Yeah,
Sylvia Sidney, who plays Juno, the caseworker in Beetlejuice, she looks almost exactly the same as she does in Beetlejuice, despite there being 10 plus years between the two films.
Yeah. Because she has that fucking amazing voice.
She does, and she's possibly like the best actor in this, so it's great.
And so at this point they then show like, here's how you have a virgin birth when you basically cross a woman with an alien entity, and I really liked that. It was kind of no. Kirsty made a face at me like she didn't like it.
When I looked it up, it was basically they used stock footage from the interior of a ship on Space 1999, which was a Jerry Anderson like Thunderbirds.
Oh, now I'm disappointed. I thought that's the thing. I thought they'd made it. I thought it was like they made that up. They mocked that up themselves.
And then they just had like a naked woman rising around in an orb of light. So you've basically got these two, like, not. When you see that, it's just one woman, but this is the experience that these two different women had. So you got Mrs. Phillips, who fell down the stairs, and then Juno from like when she was like younger, and they're just naked, and they say that it just felt like something passed through them, and so it was like two virgin births basically, like so that whole connection of virgin birth with Jesus and all of those sorts of things. So he's now realised that he is the same as this like god alien creature, but different. So it's that his humanity comes through stronger than the other, who is more on the alien side, so he's able to control people more. But he then sort of realises his powers and tests it out by meeting up with this pimp who'd shown up slightly earlier with like a corrupt
in
cop.
a real kind of like padding out the runtime scene.
So disjointed, like, and then so he basically goes to this place and he kind of forces them to kill each other rather than him. So they try and get. Why doesn't
he make them like turn themselves in?
I don't know.
Like, it's not like his personality's changed just because he figures out that he has some alien element to him.
No, it's just like, rather than getting people to just kill randos on the street, he's like, I am going to direct my killings towards bad people who do bad things. So he's like a weird vigilante, like making people cut their own throats.
It's like alien Charles Bronson.
Like, people are still dead, dude.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I didn't like it. I did not care for it.
No, and then so now he's like, right, so I've tested my powers. I know exactly what I'm doing now. So he goes off for like a final showdown with his sibling. So, you know, like non-gender specific sibling, although they've been referring to him as a him throughout. It suddenly becomes very clear when they're having a chat about it, and he just suddenly goes, Bernard suddenly goes, I can have your children, you know, and we can create a whole new race of people that are like us. And then raises up his shirt and he has a vagina on his ribs.
Now, let's flash back to the alien abduction scene earlier.
Yeah.
Was that a vagina? Okay, so when she's... Okay, it was.
Yeah, it's kind of close up, so you don't see it massively.
It's an abstract vagina. I didn't want to be that guy who's like, Kirsty, is
that a vagina?
Is that a vagina?
This is the most we've said the word vagina at all ever on this podcast, so you're welcome. I think they also pointed out that, like, he lifts up his shirt, and I don't know whether it was meant to be a point that, like, the vagina type orifice is kind of where, like, the Jesus stab wound is meant to, spear wound is meant to be. So it's like this real blasphemous kind of thing. And he basically then just goes like, no, I'm not doing that. That's absolutely ridiculous, you know, and then hits Bernard and realizes and says it out loud, just in case it wasn't clear for the people watching at home, you've never felt pain. And we're like, oh, okay, so he has got a human side. And then decides to bring the building down.
The bringing the building down scene is one of my favourite, just because so they do the classic, like, they've not got loads of budget, okay, that's obvious, so they go for the old standard, if we shake the camera, it'll look like the building's falling down,
and then throw bits of board and stuff around.
And if the actor kind of like stumbles around, then it will look realistic.
And I've seen it done. Light behind it.
Yeah, and I've seen it done before, and it does look realistic. The thing is, they have to be consistent in the way they do it, because there are certain shots where especially ones where Peter's going down the stairs, where I feel like they forget to shake the camera, so it just looks like he's like doing the fucking jitterbug down the stairs, and everything else seems like it's perfectly normal.
It's kind of like in like Star Trek, like old Star Trek.
Oh yeah,
they would kind of
for
just
sure.
all wobble at the same time. But yeah. So essentially, he brings the building down, gets arrested for the death, and they're like, the death of this 24-year-old person or whatever. You know, like why did you do it? And then he just says to the waiting reporters as he's being brought in, "God told me to." But it kind of loses his impact because he says it twice, and I'm like, you didn't need that. Like, it could have just been pow and been quite powerful, but for some reason he says it twice, and it was just like, okay, great. And then that's
now,
the end.
I feel like we've shit on this movie a lot.
Yeah.
What did you like about it?
I think it was an interesting premise. I just think it was kind of looked at from a completely wrong way. I ended up reading, because normally I'll give a bunch of facts and things, and I've given a few through here, but I don't really have a fact list at the end, because, like I said, it was... A lot of people didn't like it when it first came out. It's kind of become a cult classic over the years, but there's not really a lot of, like, interesting, like, factoids to do with it, apart from just a couple of bits that I've added already. I think a lot of people have kind of... thought that it's meant to be like a social commentary on what people will do in the name of God, and how people think that like religion is weird and all those sorts of things. Like I said, it's a really interesting idea, and I think if you kind of pulled it apart and put it back together a little bit better, it would be doable. We've just got Peanut the Chihuahua has decided to wade in.
Hey. I think its bonkersness was way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
There is stuff in there that I still don't feel like, you know, in my film watching experience, there's stuff in there that I still don't think I've seen a film kind of tackle. Like, I've never seen a film really do the kind of Chariot of the Gods, Ancient Astronauts kind of style, like version of a horror movie. I've never seen that done before. There's some really great scenes in there we didn't mention. There's like a whole subplot about the wife and the mistress, and they meet up, and there's some really nice kind of scenes in there about Catholic guilt, and he wanted all the children to be stillborn because he didn't. Why was that?
Well, that was one of the bits that they said about. They were like, you know, they touch on the fact that like his wife had 3 miscarriages throughout their relationship, and they kind of point it out like it's that he willed them to die, and he sort of shouts and screams about that, like, I never did that. But yeah, we're wondering whether it's meant to be that he had a
some inkling of like what was
like
going
a subconscious on. You know, I cannot procreate because I cannot let this happen. I can't have children because what if they're like this horrific creature? I don't know. But I don't know whether it was that, like, to some people, like, intense religious belief, like when you get like people who are like really intensely into their religion and their God, whether to some people that seems as weird and as out there as people who are like, I was abducted by an alien. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, like there's like different levels.
Like I said, I love some of the ideas in it. I liked some of the acting in it. I didn't really feel like there were any great set pieces in it that kind of... I feel like even when you're on a low budget, something like that scene at the beginning with the sniper can be really tense, and that you can play it out, and it would make a really effective, like, engaging opening scene of a horror movie. But I just feel like the technical limitations they had, or the budget, or the actors, or whatever it was, just meant that it didn't really quite connect for me. The editing was all over the shop. I couldn't get behind any of the editing. And yeah, sorry, Peanut is just going bonkers in here. She's alright. She's like, let me out.
She wants to know. She wants to know what the hell this film was about.
Yeah. Did it shit you up?
It did not in the slightest.
It did the opposite. It made me laugh too much.
There were a couple of giggles in there.
There were too many giggles.
I mean, that is like, it can be a good thing about horror movies. Like, if they're good and they do what they're meant to do and they shit you up, they'll stay with you. If they're bad, you can laugh your ass off at it and it's still.
The thing is, though, that this didn't fall into either of those categories, which for me is the worst part of it. There are films so bad that you laugh at them and you're like, oh my god, remember we saw that, it sucked so bad, and remember that bit where this happened. This thing has the ability, or has the ideas, and I think some of the talent to make it a really good movie, but it just didn't quite live up to it. Didn't, you know what I mean? There were a lot of good parts to it, but it didn't add up to the sum of its parts, basically.
Yeah. I mean, one of the bits that I read about it, again, I couldn't find a huge amount of information about why, but maybe it's slightly telling. Again, it could be because it's, it might have been like a real shocking, blasphemous film back in the 70s, but I don't know whether that means that it doesn't really age well, because you've got all these people that are just like, it was shocking. Like, it was originally called, it was released as God Told Me To, and then there are a whole bunch of like different networks and stuff that wouldn't carry it because of that. So it was either that they were like a deeply religious company, or they were concerned about like people complaining and stuff. I mean, with the amount of stuff that we saw in the Kubrick exhibit yesterday, which was people that were writing their absolute horror and distaste at A Clockwork Orange, and so there are people out there that are still absolutely horrified at all of these things. So they actually changed the name of it to Demon, which is a pretty sweet name. I think it's Demon with an exclamation mark as well, which makes it even better. And then it's not really demonic though, is it?
No.
So,
but the thing is, horror movies half the time have nothing to do with what the fuck's actually going on.
But then also it was telling, like I was going to say before I ended up going on to that part of it, but there were two executive producers that were involved in this film, and they insisted that their names be taken off it. I couldn't find out why. I don't know whether it was because they were like, oh my god, like, you cannot go down this route of like, this is only like 10 years or so after they started really, when they were still like, you couldn't say damn, hell, or god, or all of those sorts of things in films, because it would, like they would cut them out of films. So I don't know whether it was still had that same mentality or not, or whether they were just like, this film sucks and we don't want our name on it. Like, I couldn't find out why.
Yeah, a little from column A, a little from column B.
It's kind of read between the lines though. If you've got executive producers on there who, like, have like put their money into it and their time and things like that, and then by the end of it they see the film and they're like, no, I don't want my name associated with this. Like, it's intriguing, but it's. I've read a whole bunch of reviews where people are like, this is just amazing because it's just so wild and so out there.
I think the thing is, the one thing I did say that I did like about it is ahead of its time and it's fucking bonkers ideas, and I think that that can give you a lot of goodwill. You know what I mean? That can be, an idea is probably the most difficult thing to come up with when it comes to a film. It's one of the most difficult parts. If you haven't got a good idea, you've not got a film. But for me, just seeing that on screen, it just didn't translate, and that for me is the saddest thing. 97 on the list.
Yeah, I'm putting it at 100.
Yeah, straight up to number 100.
100. So that means that The Mist is now back at 99.
Okay.
So it's after The Mist for me. So Babadook 98.
And Martin 97. We're crafting this list now. It's starting to become more. Originally, I was like, "Oh, nothing's going to change that much," and now immediately I'm like,
"For real."
Cool. Right. So
that means that the next is 96.
It Follows,
which both of us have watched. We've watched it together. We've watched it more than once. It came out in 2014.
Have we? I think I've only watched it once.
I'm sure I've watched it more than once.
Okay.
So so next week is It Follows, number 96. So this movie, without giving too much away before you watch it, basically deals with fatal curses and it turns the horror movie virgin trope completely on its head. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it again and really pulling it apart, because I remember enjoying it very much.
Yeah,
so.
I seem to remember really enjoying it, so I'm really excited for this one. If you completely disagree with everything we've said about God Told Me To, or you just want to get in touch with us and say, hey, make sure you get us on Behind the Sofa podcast on Facebook, on Instagram, and please make sure you go and leave us a rate, a review, a subscribe anywhere that you listen, and we'll be back next Monday with another episode.
Yeah, so you can find all of the episodes and all of the information about where you can listen by going to tinyurl.com/Behind the Sofa podcast. And if you want to get straight into the episodes and where you can listen to them directly, then go to tinyurl.com/Behind the Sofa episodes, and you'll find everything on there.
Cool. Anything else?
No, not really. Just we're already shifting around the list, so we'd be interested to find out your thoughts on it as well. And you can do a mini review of your own if you check out our stories on Instagram. So if you go to instagram.com and go to Behind the Sofa podcast, you can leave us a little review and we'll pop it up in our stories so that we can tell everyone what you thought.
Cool. Right, well, I guess we'll see you next week then.
Yeah. From Behind the Sofa, good night.
Good night.